Well, they are very vulnerable. So the new export controls are actually quite comprehensive. So China released 6 new documents specifying export controls, adding new rare earth elements to the controls, but also battery materials for the cathode and anode. And there's also a new extraterritorial component to rare earth licensing. So this is really a big change. And I mean, supply chain have already been affected a lot over the past months. And now we would put additional export controls on top of that. Yeah, so the vulnerability is quite high. And I would like to point out that I would see the biggest impact for now is in the battery supply chain when it comes to cathode and anode materials, because there China has a major position, a certain dominance in the production. And we will see that for global battery manufacturers that there will be some impact on the supply chain. So overall, if you look at the industries that will be affected, we can say clearly, of course, automotive, but also energy storage. Medical equipment is also a big field where we see very specific impacts. But yeah, there are also many others areas. So in the end, you could also say, okay, it's the entire economy that feels the shocks in a way. Ideally, they already have responded before the export controls happened. So I think it's essential now for companies to have some sort of a supply chain resilience management that does not, is not just a firefighter, but can also assess global risk beforehand and, is transparent about the supply chain. And also has like cautionary measures like second sourcing, stockpiling of critical materials, and so on, which will of course cost money, but it's like an insurance you have to pay for, to be prepared for such events. If you are like stricken by surprise of these export controls, of course, well, in that case, I think all you can do is kind of an emergency management. Yeah, so do the best to get the licenses, work with your suppliers, to conduct these, the provision of the information that is necessary to get the licenses. Find alternative sources if possible outside of China, of course. Yeah, so they're set of like emergency measures, but again, like a long-term vision is also very important. Yes, I see it as very likely. We have seen that China has used export controls since 2023, around 7 or 8 times for a wide range of materials. So China will definitely use it again. And I think what we can see also in the economic tensions, competition with the US, it's one of the major tools for China to get leverage. So where can we expect it? I think we will not only see it in raw materials. So raw materials is definitely one area, and I think there's also more way to go. So for example, for magnesium, I think it's one of the candidates because it's a lightweight material, for also used, for example, in automotive, for lightweight alloys. And China has here also huge dominance. But I think it's also going beyond raw materials. So for example, in production technology, we have already seen this for lithium extraction technologies. We have seen this for rare earth extraction technologies. But I could think also of other technologies where China actually has a technological advantage at the moment that they would use this. And third group, I think where we could see more impacts is intermediaries. Yeah, we have seen this now with magnets. We have seen this with the cathode and anode materials. So we could say like, okay, it's also happening more in these areas, and that's also where I would actually expect most of the impact. Absolutely, and I would say it's already there. It's clearly there, and we are obviously in a world of more inward and outward protectionism, inward meaning on the tariff side and outward, on the export control side. And I think we see overall that export controls are becoming the norm. Yeah, so that you say like, okay, free trade is something that is not so normal anymore, and you have more and more interventions from policy side, not just in China, of course, also in many other countries. But indeed, I mean, this is the emergence, and it's one feature of the new system of global trade. Absolutely. Nexperia is an interesting case, and I think the implications are quite huge. Yeah, so we have heard a lot about supply disruptions, because you have to know that Nexperia makes the wafers actually mostly in Europe, but the assembly, so the final stages also of the manufacturing is happening mainly in China, about 80%. If these 80% cannot be exported, you can imagine that suppliers around the globe will have difficulties. Yeah, they could shift the assembly to Malaysia or Philippines, but they don't have the capacity there. So that really means you have like difficulties there to supply global markets, and Nexperia is, for example, very important also to the automotive industry. So yeah, definitely it has quite some impact. Well, the question is also, could similar actions by European or the US become more frequent to seize companies? And in that regard, I would say still the Nexperia case is quite special. So it's a unique case in a way, because you have to understand that the Dutch government basically seized control of the company and also switched the CEO also to respond to US requests. And as you know, Nexperia's parent company, the Chinese company Ringtech, is on the entity list. And by the new 50% rule, which was released end of September, Nexperia is also now subject to these restrictions of the entity list. Yeah, and the Dutch government basically wants to avoid these restrictions, because if you have the restrictions, you cannot buy any equipment for your factory from the US or with a certain US content. And that is something which I would still say is quite special. However, I think for the moment, of course, I think we cannot expect a similar case. Yeah, but if you look further into the future, it is quite possible that companies are torn apart in this, struggle between the US and China, and are facing difficult decisions. So it is possible, of course, that under certain scenarios or like worst case scenarios, that companies will be seized, and that we also see company level export controls on the Chinese side. So I think what companies should also do now, like see like if any of their suppliers has a certain risk of, being torn apart between US and China in that way.